Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is L24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky paid a visit to show the world the mass graves in the town of Bucha, and Russian Defense Ministry denies war crimes committed, describes images as staged performance by Kyiv regime. The footage that was being presented in particular in Bucha, on which I spoke, does not give us any doubt that this was staged, Russia's envoy to United Nations. Peruvian President Pedro Castillo imposed a curfew in the capital Lima on Tuesday, banning people from leaving their homes in an attempt to curb protests against the rising fuel costs. Shanghai's cases COVID-19 rise above 30,000 as city extend lockdown. Most of the city 25 million residents remain homebound on the day lockdown was supposed to end. Hello again and welcome. Those were today's headlines, starting with the day 41 of the Russian military operation in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to demand greater help from world powers at United Nations Security Council meeting on Tuesday to battle Russia and hold its forces accountable over mounting evidence of civilians killing near Kiev that have sparked global outrage. Spokesperson for Russian Ministry of Defense accuses the Ukrainian authorities of preparing new stagings of civilians killed by Moscow forces amid international outrage after the discovery of corpses in the town of Bucha. US President Joe Biden has called the Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin a war criminal and suggested holding a war crimes trial. Russian soldiers have been accused of carrying out a genocide amid casting of the last pictures of the mass graves, torture and bodies lying in the streets as Kremlin forces pull back from Kiev. West still calls Russian forces war criminals, as many White House officials accuse Russian army of killing brutally.
As the Russian military operation in Ukraine enters its 41st day, Russian forces have received many accusations of committing war crimes in their neighboring country, Ukraine. This comes after the last images casting dead bodies of hundreds of unarmed civilians on the pavements and roads in Bucha near the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv.
These are war crimes, and they will be recognized by the world as genocide. You are here, and you can see what happened. We know that thousands of people were killed and tortured, had limbs torn, women were raped, and children killed.
During a press briefing at the White House, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says war crimes have been committed after scores of civilian bodies were found in Bucha near Kyiv, but as the situation in the country has not reached for now the level of genocide. He also warns that the next stage of this conflict could very well be prolonged.
That first quote-unquote phase of the conflict, of the Russians put it, was measured in weeks. This next phase could be measured in months or longer.
U.S. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ned Price tells reporters that the United States is receiving credible reports of torture, rape, and civilians being executed with their families.
First, as Russia's forces have retreated over the past few days, the world has been shocked by the horrifying images of the Kremlin's brutality in Bucha.
Pentagon spokesman John Kirby told reporters during a briefing that he thinks Russian forces are responsible for the atrocities in Bucha, stating that the Russian forces are committing war crimes which must be documented with investigations as there is much evidence to be collected.
I think it's fairly obvious, not just to us, but to the world, that Russian forces are responsible for the atrocities in Bucha. Now, exactly who, what units, whether they're contractors or Chechens, I don't think we're able to say right now. But we're certainly not refuting that these atrocities occurred and that they occurred at the hands of Russians.
West is still insisting on its accusations of Russian military operation and the violence of its troops deployed in the area. However, Russia denied all the claims of the Ukrainian and West authorities.
In same line of thoughts, after Ukraine allegation to Russia of attacking civilians in Bucha, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, accuses Ukraine of staging after the discovery of many bodies wearing civilian clothes in Bucha, near Kiev, in which he said is an orchestrated provocation to dehumanize the Russian army.
Now, if you look carefully at what you see in Bucha, about the corpses that lie on the streets, that were never existing before the Russian troops arrived, before they left, and suddenly they appear on the streets, lying on the road. One by one, right and left, some of them are moving. From the very beginning, it has been clear that this is nothing else but yet another staged provocation aimed at discrediting and dehumanizing of the Russian military and leveling political pressure on Russia. And
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky warns that Russia will try to hide the traces of their crimes after the discovery of many bodies wearing civilians' clothes in Bucha, near Kiev. They didn't do it in Bucha when they retreated, but in another region it is possible, Zelensky said in a video message.
The occupiers will probably try to hide the traces of their crimes. They did not do this in Bucha when they withdrew, but in other region it is possible.
Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community abroad Ramzan Lamamra held a working session with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on Monday in Moscow and met with the head of the Russian Security Council Nikolai Patrushev. As part of the bilateral dimension of Mr. Lamamra's working visit to Moscow, the talks focus on cooperation between Algeria and Russia, as well as ways and means to strengthen it in various fields as to energize the mechanism governing the strategic relations until uniting the two countries.
Ukraine.
Russian Foreign Minister said Russia will present documents showing true nature of the events in the Ukrainian city of Bucha, where Moscow forces are accused of killing civilians. Let's have a listen.
There were many instances during the military operation in Ukraine of the launching of false information, instantly followed by a propaganda campaign and furious denunciations, and when the truth emerged, several days later, no one in the West talked about it. We will, however, hold a press conference today in New York through our permanent mission, during which we will present the most detailed documents on the true nature of the events that our Western colleagues are now trying to present as evidence of war crimes committed by the Russian Federation in the town of Bucha.
US President Joe Biden says he wants to take additional sanctions against Russia after the discovery of numerous bodies wearing civilian clothes in the Bucha, Kiev city. Let's listen.
I'm seeking more sanctions, yes. I'll have time to announce that to you. He should be held accountable. Well, no. Go the war crimes tribunal. Yes, I'm going to continue to add sanctions. Thank you.
US and European countries promised to punish Russia for civilian deaths in northern Ukraine, where mass grave and tied bodies of victims murdered at close range were discovered in town retaken from Russian forces. Miriam Zian.
Russia's military is facing near universal condemnation for alleged crimes committed by its retreating forces in Kiev suburbs. Reporters began circulating footage of scores of civilian dead abandoned in the streets after Ukrainian military drove Russians out of neighborhoods like Bucha. Deaths in Bucha triggered pledges of further sanctions against Moscow from the West. US President Joe Biden says he wants to take additional sanctions against Russia, and Jake Sullivan ensured that the US will hold Russia accountable for war crimes, as he puts it.
We had already concluded that Russia committed war crimes in Ukraine, and the information from Bucha appears to show further evidence of war crimes. And as the President said, we will work with the world to ensure there is full accountability for these crimes.
During a press conference with his British counterpart, Liz Truss, Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian foreign minister, said that the atrocities discovered in Bucha are only the tip of the iceberg.
You've seen the horrors that we've seen in Bucha are just a tip of the iceberg of all the crimes that have been committed by Russian army in the territory of Ukraine so far. And I can tell you without an exaggeration, but with great sorrow, that the situation in Mariupol is much worse.
Liz Truss, British Foreign Secretary, said the UK will intensify sanctions and alleged Russia doesn't deserve a place on Human Rights Council.
We are clear that after these appalling crimes, Russia has no place on the Human Rights Council.
On the other hand, Russia denied accusations related to the murder of civilians, including in Bucha, and accused Ukraine of staged provocation aimed at discrediting and dehumanizing the Russian military.
Germany's economy and climate minister says Germany is working every day to create the conditions and stages for an embargo on Russia's energy. Let's have a listen.
We are working every day to create the conditions and the steps for an embargo. The federal government and I are convinced that this is the right way, and it's also the one that harms Putin on a daily basis. In this sense, we are on the right track, and this week will allow us to continue to progress in this direction.
According to Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Irina Verchuk, the International Committee of the Red Cross delegation in Ukraine has been released. The delegation was stopped at the way to the besieged southeast port city of Mariupol. Irina Verchuk said that the committee was released after negotiations and was sent to neighboring city of Zaporizhzhia. To a different matter now, the Pakistani opposition denounces a coup on the part of Prime Minister Imran Khan, who avoided the vote of a motion censure against him by obtaining the dissolution of parliament and the calling of early elections. Opposition speaks at press conference as Pakistani Supreme Court begins to consider consideration of motions by the opposition and the government on the legality of the National Assembly. Deputy Speaker refusal as follower of Imran Khan to submit the no confidence motion to a vote.
We had gone to the Chief Justice because we had placed hopes in him. The history of Pakistan shows that the Constitution has been violated and they have been able to prevent it. Our hope is and our demand is that the one-man coup be rectified, that the continuation of the vote of confidence be brought to an end.
In the South American country Peru, the President Pedro Castillo announced a curfew in the country's capital. This follows protests over soaring fuel and fertilizers prices. Nabil Khazini.
For the second week, rising fuel and fertilizer prices has triggered a wave of protests in the Peruvian capital, Lima. Peru's government, scrambling to bring prices down, has announced a curfew in the country's capital.
El Consejo de Ministros.
The Council of Ministers approved the declaration of curfew from 2 a.m. to 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, April 5th, in order to safeguard the fundamental rights of all people.
Hago un llamado a la calma.
I call for calm and serenity. Social protest is a constitutional right, but it must be done in accordance with the law.
The turmoil started last week when farmers and truckers blocked some main highways to Lima, leading to a rise in food prices. The violent protest caused at least 4 people to be killed.
We're living in chaos. It is a problem that the price of food has increased too much. Gasoline has also increased too much. The salary that people like us have is not enough to live on. We have to give our support in order to reach a good solution.
Early this week in central Peru, nationwide disruptions persisted in Huancayo following the country's transportation protests. Farmers and ranchers have also joined in claiming for the increase in the price of fertilizers.
I don't know if we are going to stay here until tomorrow. There should be even a police check and an ambulance, something like that, because there are children and mothers. In terms of food, we need help, because unfortunately we are stuck here.
As a solution to the crisis, the government removed the fuel tax and the president decreed a 10% increase in the monthly minimum wage. But the General Confederation of Peruvian Workers rejected the wage hike, saying it was insufficient.
Empty and quiet streets in the western part of Shanghai impact you, which confines since Friday, while China has a total of 30,146 cases of COVID-19, which is the highest number since the peak of the first wave more than 2 years ago. Health authorities have announced the discovery of a possible new sub-Omicron variant in the Shanghai region. The lockdown has been extended till further notice in the city's western districts, which has become a test bed for the government's zero-tolerance dynamic clearance policy and its ability to contain the highly infectious Omicron variety. South Africa has removed almost all remaining COVID restrictions following a sustained decline in infections. President Cyril Ramaphosa on Monday confirmed the country would end its national state of disaster introduced in 2020 to manage the pandemic.
Since the requirement for a national state of disaster to be declared in terms of the Disaster Management Act are no longer met, Cabinet has decided to terminate the national state of disaster with effect from midnight tonight.
According to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel warns that policies are leading the planets to a dangerous temperature rises and urge for an urgent halt to rising emissions. Islam Sidon, what follow?
The world's highest body of climate scientists has warned that unless greenhouse gas emissions decline faster than the countries have agreed, temperatures on Earth will shoot through a major danger point, warning of the cost of inactivity, but also citing optimistic signs of progress.
We are on a pathway to global warming of more than double the 1.5 degree limit agreed in Paris. Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic. This is a climate emergency.
The first item on the global to-do list, according to UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is to stop greenhouse gas emissions from rising any further. The report also said carbon emissions need to drop 43% by 2030 and 84% by mid-century to meet the more determined Paris goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius.
The big message we've got, human activities got us into this problem, and human agency can actually get us out of it again. And I think that's the hopeful message that we're trying to get over in this report. It's not all lost. We really have the chance to do something.
In 2015 Paris Agreement, governments vowed to keep global warming for below 2 degrees Celsius this century. Yet since pre-industrial times, temperatures have risen by over 1.1 degrees Celsius, resulting in quantifiable increases in disasters. On the other hand, the World Health Organization calls for reducing the use of fossil fuels.
The bad news is that when we look at all of this data, still what the data is telling us that a big proportion, almost 100% of the global population is still breathing air that exceed the standards recommended by the World Health Organization.
The authors of the IPCC report point to many ways in which the world can be brought back on track to 2 degrees Celsius or even, with tremendous effort, return to 1.5 degrees Celsius after that threshold has been passed.
41 Sri Lanka lawmakers walked out of the ruling coalition on Tuesday, leaving the government of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in a minority in parliament as he struggled within the country's worst economic crisis in decades. And in another setback for the administration, Finance Minister Ali Sabri resigned a day after his appointment and the head of crucial talks scheduled with the International Monetary Fund for a loan program.
nations. And then we want a political model that works. And new Sri Lanka will begin with stronger institutions and not just a change in leadership. An interim government is nothing but internal party politics.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's sister has slammed South Korea for flaunting its preemptive attack capabilities for the second time in 3 days, warning that if provoked, her country would destroy its neighbor. Kim Yong-jong blasted South Korea Defense Minister Soh Wook's recent remarks regarding preemptive attacks as a fantastic daydream and the hysteria of a madman in a statement released by North Korea's official Korean Central News Agency on Tuesday. Lebanon's central bank governor Raed Salama has denied reports circulating in the country that the regulator is bankrupt. The statement comes after Lebanese media report Deputy Prime Minister Saad al-Shami as saying the Lebanese state and central bank are bankrupt. Lebanon is sinking in one of the most severe global crises. The economic crisis in the country is the worst since Lebanon took independence. Shooting occurred early Sunday morning downtown Sacramento has left 6 people dead and at least 9 more injured. According to California police, the facts behind the incident were not disclosed, but police said in a tweet that its substantial police presence will continue and the scene remains active. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, has become Twitter's largest shareholder after a bought 9.2% stake in the company. Following that, the price of Twitter shares has soared by more than 26% in the pre-market trade before Wall Street opened on Monday. The Tesla co-founder has now more than quadrupled the shares of Twitter's founder, Jack Dorsey, who owns 2.25%. Moving on now to Arsenal boss Mikel Arteta apologized for his side performance in the surprise defeat at Crystal Palace and accepted it was not good enough for the North London club. The visitors had gone into the game looking to move back into the top 4 and strengthen their hopes of Champions League participation next season. Palace victory in the first at home in the league in 2020-22 moves them up to the 9th, while Arsenal remain 5th outside of the top 4 goal difference, albeit with a game in hand.
It was, but you know, the stadium, the atmosphere create that kind of momentum as well to allow ourselves to go and put pressure on the ball, and we needed that kind of game out of possession in a really good way, because if they have time on the ball, they can hurt any team, and we didn't allow them to do that today. So when you're looking at up front with JP and Connor, I think they work really well and try to put pressure on the central back and not allow them time on the ball, and that was a really good team performance today.
We didn't have any dominance, any sequences of play where we could take some control of the game, and we conceded 2 poor goals as well. So overall it's unacceptable. Put our hand up, me the first one, apologize and regroup, and tomorrow is a new day and a new opportunity to start to prepare the game against Brighton.
The Italian club ship on Monday night at San Siro Stadium, AC Milan failed this time to secure 3 points, and they could only draw in a goalless game against Bologna, which comes as disappointment for Rossoneri supporters after Napoli and Inter both recorded wins over the weekend. Napoli now is in the 2nd place, 1 point back AC Milan, and Inter on the other side, although they could manage to win away at Juventus, but find themselves 4 points behind the cross-city rivals. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder for our main stories. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky paid a visit to show the world the mass graves in the town of Bucha. And Russian Defense Ministry denies war crimes committed, describes images as staged performance by Kiev regime. The footage that was being presented, in particular in Bucha, on which I spoke, does not give us any doubt that this was staged, Russia's envoy to United Nations. Peruvian President Pedro Castillo imposed a curfew in the capital Lima on Tuesday, banning people from leaving their homes in an attempt to curb protests against rising fuel costs. Shanghai's COVID-19 cases rise above 30,000 as city extend lockdown. Most of the city's 25 million residents remain homebound on the day lockdown. That's all for now. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye.